Hello everyone. So in this video, we will be considering the final and most successful attempt, as some commentators say, to rescue the reality of the physical world from the fatal effects of Eleatic logic, right? So we are looking at the atomic theory. So we have seen two such attempts. We have seen the attempt of Empedocles, where he posits these four primary substances, and he says, well, there is they get together through love and they are pulled apart by strife, and so you have this kind of combination and dissolution, and that's what creates the physical world and the changes in the physical world. Then you have Anaxagoras, who talks about an infinity of infinite divisibility and infinite particles through this infinite divisibility, and a mind that controls these particles and moves them around and puts them in different sort of shapes and places and size, and that's the creation of the cosmos. And now we are looking at the third attempt, which is the atomist attempt from Leucippus and Democritus. So what is the Eleatic premise? The Eleatic premise is what is one and immovable, right? Remember, the what is one. It is immovable. What is not, which is the void or emptiness, now with the atomists, is not. And given that without a void, there's no possibility of movement. Also, without a void, without divisibility, there's no possibility of movement. And you cannot have more than one thing either if there's nothing to keep them apart, And which is why one would say that the attempts made by Empedocles and Anaxagoras, when they talk about being as being divisible, but then they also say there is no such thing as void. If you remember the clepsydra experiment, where with that water clock, where it is which Empedocles did, in which he put that water clock inside water and said, look, there is corporeality to air. It is occupying space, which means that when water moves in, then what's happening is it's replacing that air in there with water. So there is no gap, there is no void. Although Aristotle does sort of say that when he talks about pores, and he does talk about pores, which we did not mention because we didn't have time. There is some concept of the void that he has. He's just not being very consistent. Well, with the atomists now, they take the last step in refusing sort of Parmenidean logic. They still accept it, because they still sort of accept that if what is and what is not, then the things that Parmenides says would follow, right? Being would be unique, being would be immovable, being would be indivisible, all kinds of things. So they say, well, let's posit that all these things are true, that being is sort of indivisible, being is sort of immovable in itself, if what is. But then they say, well, as Lucretius, whom I quoted earlier, he puts it in Latin. He says, "Namque est in rebus inane." There's nevertheless nothing in things, right? You have this void, you have this empty spaces, and so what they are basically claiming, and the challenge is met head on by basically saying that there is such a thing as nothing. Yeah, that it's not only what is, yes, what is, right, but what is not is also. It is just the empty spaces, it's the gaps between things that also exists. So this is a pretty big challenge. They're basically saying there is such a thing as a void, there is such a thing as empty space. It does not have being, because it is not, right? It does not have being and existence in the same way, but it has existence. And we are now separating, really, we are moving from, a kind of ontology to a phenomenology, really. That's not what they're saying that they're doing, but with the weight of history, we can say that this is the first step towards moving from an ontological way of looking at things to a phenomenological way of looking at things, because what they're saying is that, okay, fine, it is not, the void is not, but it exists. Right? And why is it necessary? And this is the Epicurean way of doing things, who would come later, who would say that, well, there is motion, look. Now, don't sort of deny what your senses tell you. Rather, accept what your senses tell you, and then try to find, why it is. And maybe there is something wrong with your theory if your experiments are telling you that, your theory sounds absurd. So this kind of very empiricist attitude, which is not yet there in Democritus, they're still doing a very. So I suppose one of the differences between Democritian and later Epicurean philosophy would be that Epicurus was an empiricist through and through, while with Democritus, you will see a kind of rationalistic sort of way of looking at things. He's still in this Eleatic tradition in that sense, Eleatic and even Ionian tradition. If you think about it, an Anaxagoras or an Anaximenes or Thales or an Anaximander, I was thinking, or an Anaximenes or Thales or an Anaxagoras or Empedocles or and Parmenides, Zeno, they're all rationalist. There's something rationalistic about them. Though with Anaximenes, I think you could still say he's more in the empiricist line. But there is a rationalist element to the atomic theory out here. Yeah, but there's also that element that there is a manifest movement, and they don't want to deny this manifest movement in reality. And if this manifest movement requires people to consider, to break with some of the Parmenidean premises, then, so be it. Esto, right? Then there should be, that there cannot be movement without void is something that they are positing, which is also, by the way, against Anaxagoras and against Empedocles, because both of them did posit movement, but through mere divisibility of things, not through the existence of what is not, right? So what they are then claiming, so they are accepting one of the premises. So unlike Anaxagoras, who says, well, being is divisible and infinitely divisible, right? That's the one sort of premise of Parmenides that he breaks with. The atomists, they break with the premise, not with the premise of infinite sort of divisibility, because actually, atom, the word atom itself is not Thomas. To cut, right? So it is something that cannot be cut. So that means that the atom itself, the meaning itself is indivisible. So it is an indivisible particle. It is, in fact, some would claim, it is in fact a Parmenidean what is. It has all the characteristics of the Parmenidean what is. Inside it is indivisible. So inside there cannot be any movement within the atom, right? The atom inside doesn't move. The atom doesn't, what else? It's unique, it's singular, it's all kinds of things. It's not necessarily only spherical though, and that's something that we'll see, that there should be then only spherical atoms if you're accepting all the Parmenidean thesis, but they have infinite shapes, so it seems, commentators say. Right. So, given that nothing of being of what is not being, because what is, then how do we posit then, if we accept that one premise, then how do we posit anything, any movement, any change? How do we not just collapse back into the Parmenidean thesis? Is by saying that it is not a unity. I mean, in the sense that it is a unity in itself, but it's not unique, right? You have an infinite number of what is, right? You have an infinite number of beings. So you have ta'onta, right? Beings, like loads of them. And the idea is that these are really tiny beings, so that's why you had to consider sunbeams, right, to be able to see them, because, and even there, what you see is like what are visible in that moment, but that gives you an idea that the world is composed of these extremely tiny, imperceptible, sort of like indivisible what is, Parmenidean what is, which are too small to be seen. And this is Aristotle's summary, by the way, of Democritus. So, what do these what is do? They move in the void, and their combination causes sort of coming to be, and their dissolution causes perishing, right? Their separation causes dissolution, let's say. What do? They act by touch, right? So they act and are acted upon when they touch, when they intermingle. So there's this sort of idea of intertwining, and I remember there was this beautiful sort of word out here. Maybe I can find it. written it somewhere. Yeah, symploke, right? This intertwining of things, and this peripalaxis, this scattering around of things, and what they're doing in themselves is palmos, vibration, right? So this symploke of things, this intertwining of things, is what generates the world, and this peripalaxis, this scattering of things, is what causes dissolution, right? So they are coming together, they interlace, they intertwine, and that's how they create the world, right? So you have these atoms, and if you want to use a modern sort of way of talking about it, these atoms intertwine and form compounds, and these compounds then generate the world. And the breaking of the compound sort of dissolves, which means that nothing is created or destroyed in this world, according to the atomists. Like with the other sort of, like with Anaxagoras or Empedocles, they also say nothing is sort of created or destroyed. It's just combination and dissolution. So there's nothing new. But the difference is in what these atoms are. Right? The atoms in themselves only have size and shape. So that's the amazing point. They have infinite varieties in size and shape, but they don't have any other inherent characteristics. So they don't have anything else that is inherent to them that's their own. It's only via combination and via interaction. So there's a kind of relationality that gives rise to the properties. And all these properties are emergent. Right? These are not fixed properties. These are emergent properties that emerge via the intertwining and intermixing of these elements, right? And so, in that sense, I suppose, as I said, generation and destruction are already impossible, and what is built up out of atoms is also not a unity of a sort, right? There is no sort of single being generated by this means. You know, you don't have, so unlike with, like in the other cosmogonies, if you notice, there was this idea of a single Earth being generated. There's still very, very geocentric in that sense, or something centric, you know, sun-centric even. So you have a single being that is generated, and then that one being is sort of, or with Parmenides, where you have a single unity, but that is not divisible. Or with Empedocles as well, it really seems like, you know, there's successive worlds where you have single unity generated by the action of love, action of strife pulled apart, then action of love generated again. Well, what's happening with them is that there is no single unity that is generated. In fact, it's infinitely spread and infinitely scattered about, and wherever the combination of atoms occur, and they chance to form, and we'll talk about chance and necessity, they chance to form certain compounds, new worlds are generated. And so with the atomists, you will have this idea of innumerable worlds, but innumerable synchronic worlds, right? Or worlds throughout time. It's anyway infinite time and space and infinite number of atoms. And so they are constantly generating and dissolving, but all over the place. So you'll have multiple worlds, and multiple worlds with multiple varieties. In fact, a very sort of, we would think of, at that time it was definitely they were doing science fiction, but now we really do believe this, in which they said that there are multiple worlds with some of them have life, some of them don't have life, some of them might have, you know, a bigger sun than us, some of them might be bigger than us, some of them might have multiple suns and moons. So they have this idea for which they required something like ancient atomism to sort of like give them this flexibility of thought, right? This kind of flexibility of thought to be able to imagine such a world, right? So for this, in fact, what was necessary was the idea of emptiness, of inane, of the void, right? Of nothing. This was extremely necessary. So with this void, we satisfy in some way the Eleatic condition of being and still allow for a physical world. And if we think of this void as empty space, which is not yet very, very clear, because, you know, the idea of void with the ancient atomists is not being, rather, right? It's gap, right? Void is something that is not being and yet exists. It's like sort of a gap. If you want to think of it as chaos or chasm in Hesiod, you can say that as well. the idea is that what has real existence must be corporeal, right? And but this corporeality doesn't need to be present everywhere, right? So last time we talked about, you know, movement, motion, which we'll talk about later, by continuity and by sort of, you know, in discrete motion. Even the existence of things can be thought of in terms of continuity, you know, legato existence, and, you know, a kind of discrete existence, you know, staccato existence, tuk, 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 right? So there is this idea that, you know, you can have corporeal existence, but that doesn't imply continuous corporeal existence. There can be places that it doesn't occupy. You know, the idea of topos, right? A place which is, and place, topos is equated to kenon, to emptiness, right? So the idea of there being sort of spaces that are not occupied, and that gives you an idea of place in the first place, right? Otherwise, there was no idea of place. And what there was the problem of Zeno, who said, you know, then place must have a place, and the place of the place must have a place, kind of a thing. But this place is just negatively defined in this case, in which it's basically saying that it's not a being, right? It's not an existing thing. So place does not exist. So whatever does not exist is place, you know, in this reversal of this, you know, transitive sort of relation. So in order to admit motion into our system, we need this idea of empty parts of the void, of the existence of the void, which can be thought of in perhaps in anachronistic terms as place, right? So this is what will allow plurality in motion. So the atoms now, to sort of, you know, summarize, are these Parmenidean sort of atoms, which are plural, right? It's the what is of Parmenides, which is plural. These are ungenerated, imperishable, right? What are the characteristics? We are just copying from Parmenides, right? They are ungenerated, they don't come into being. They are imperishable, they don't die. They are unchangeable, they don't turn from one atom to another, right? The atom remains what it is. What changes is the compound, right? The combination of atoms can give you new things, but the atoms themselves, these indivisible particles, they don't change, right? They cannot be added to or subtracted from. You can't have atom plus a half, right? So yeah, a nuclear fusion is not happening in this world, right? So they cannot be added or subtracted from. They are homogeneous. They are finite, right? In themselves, and a plenum. They are a complete thing, right? Inside them, they are continuous, like a Parmenidean being, and because they're continuous, they are indivisible, because you cannot cut it at any point. That's the definition of the atom. You cannot cut it, right? But outside of it, it is not, right? Because it's finite. And this is a question that was posed, that, you know, what happens when you get to the edge of what is, right? What is not? What's outside of the limit of what is? If you posit a limit, you're positing an outside of the limit. And the outside of the limit, you know, unlike this idea where it turns around into itself, you know, this palinthropos, which Parmenides didn't like very much, here you have an outside of this limit, and that is what is not, right? So there is this void outside, there is no void inside, which means that it is an uncut, indivisible atom. So it sort of refuses the Anaxagorean sort of notion of infinite divisibility, which can then move, right? And the idea is, the supposition is that there are sort of an infinite number of such solid, these are solid of course, imperishable entities of microscopic size. They are really, really tiny, which are surging around, which are moving around, which are vibrating, you know, that's the word used out here, in this infinite space, right? So what are we doing then? We are talking about a being as plenum, full, we're talking about not being void as empty, right? And the idea is that being exists no more than not being, i.e. being and non-being both exist, because void or emptiness exists no more than body, right? And I'll read out from Aristotle's Metaphysics a very short summary of the theory, the physical theory of the atomists, where in Alpha 4 he is describing the difference between Empedocles and Anaxagoras and then the atomists. So he gets to the atomists, he says, Leucippus, however, and his companion Democritus said that the elements were the full and the empty, or the full, the solid and the void, the full and the void. And that of these, the full and the solid were what is, and the empty or the void was what is not. Accordingly, he denies that what is exists any more than what is not, any more than the void exists more than the body, right? So equal existence to both. And he says that these things are the causes of entities as matter. And just as those who make the underlying substance one produce other things by affections of it, positing that the rare and the dense are the principles of the affections, so that's probably Anaximenes or somebody. In the same way, these thinkers too say that the differences are the causes of the other things. And they say that these are three, right? What are the three things that cause differences? Shape, order, and position. For these say that what differs in shape, place, and manner only, right? So the atom, the only difference between atoms is between the shape of the atoms, the position of the atoms, and the order of the atoms, shape, place, and manner only. And of these, shape is shape. Okay, I don't know what's happening with the translation. I should have gotten the Greek. Location is arrangement, and manner is position. For instance, A differs from N in shape. So, or we could think of, he's using Latin letters, but Greek letters is probably different. So, A differs from N in shape, AN from NA in arrangement, and Z from N in position. So Z like this, N like this. I think it's probably nu and zeta in capitals, alpha and nu in shape. So alpha differs from nu in shape, alpha nu from nu alpha in sort of arrangement, and zeta from nu in position. As regards change then, whence and in what way entities have it, these thinkers too, like the others, spoke loosely. Right, so motion, we'll consider motion in the next video properly. So about the first two causes, as we say, the earlier thinkers seem to have got so far in the inquiry. Okay, that's Aristotle and his general sort of very perfunctory way of dealing with people and saying, oh, but do they fit into my four causes? Okay, so let's look at Aristotle's summary. What is he saying? It's a very good summary, very important summary. Basically, he's saying that there are differences in the atoms which are responsible for everything in the world, right? And these differences are what cause this world to be plural. Because imagine if all the atoms were Parmenidean sphericities, they were all little spherical atoms, then how would they combine? Why would they combine? And how would they form new things? So the idea is that the atoms, even though they're indivisible and tiny, they differ in shape, right? They differ in arrangement, in which, you might have like atom that looks like this with an atom that looks like this, sort of combining together. So they differ in shape, they differ in arrangement. And they differ in position. So, some may be facing this way, some may be facing this way, some may be facing this way, right? So they differ in all these things. So they differ in their relation with each other. They differ in themselves first, relation with each other, and in their arrangement, right? So as he says, A differs from N in shape, AN from NA in arrangement, and Z from N in position, right? Now, the difference in shape and size actually does not mean difference in essential nature or substance. The physis, let's say, of this is not different because they're all the same indivisible particles with no essential differences, right? And they don't have any sensible qualities. They don't have, they're not hot or cold or wet or dry or even heavy or light. And that's one of the critiques of Aristotle, that, the weight, where does the weight come from? Like, why don't they have weight? How do they actually sort of move at all if they don't have weight? And that's why Epicurus later said weight is also an essential property. And in fact, he added weight and impenetrability, in which he said weight is an essential property. And the fact that they cannot be nothing can enter them. But I think that nothing can enter them is already covered with the idea of the atom. So maybe Epicurus is just explaining, right? So they don't have any sensible qualities, which means that unlike Anaxagoras' atoms, they don't have this infinite divisibility and that everything is everything kind of idea is not there. Rather, nothing is in everything. There's no sensible qualities in anything. In fact, sensible qualities are emergent properties, right? They emerge through the combination of things. They're infinite both in number and in shape. And however, they are invisible owing to their small size, right? Infinite in number, invisible because they're tiny. And they're so tiny as to escape our senses. And out of this, Democritus generates and constructs the visible and sensible masses. So out of these really tiny, invisible, indivisible things, he creates generates the whole world. And then it is because of the shapes and forms that we have variety. And this variety then can dissolve only by the atoms going apart or scattering. So in fact, the atoms cannot be destroyed at all. Remember, they're indivisible, and that means that they cannot be further cut, they cannot be further divided. So the dissolution of things comes from the atoms being scattered again, but then they can combine again. So that means that you have this infinite possibility of dissolution and combination and new things being formed, which means, a similar thing can be formed later of things. And this is something that Epicureans did develop. And you have that in Lucretius, I think, where he talks about the idea of clones of things being formed in the future by chance, completely by chance. In summary, let's say, you have really tiny atoms which are invisible, which are really tiny and indivisible. They cannot be cut. That's their definition. There's a lower limit, that means, to their smallness. They are lower limit to their smallness. After that, they come in different shapes, sizes, positions, arrangement, all kinds of things. And then they themselves cannot change parts, but the compounds can change parts, and that's what is responsible for the change in the bodies of things. And that's what creates and dissolves the world, right? So in the next video, we'll talk about motion and its cause, which is also pretty interesting and which is something that bothered Aristotle a lot. And in the later videos, we'll talk about cosmology, cosmogony, etc. Okay, thank you.